Hello and good evening, everyone. Yeah, let's take a minute before we start. How's everyone doing? Welcome, dear audience, to the Troublemakers Assembly, and presenting our host, Dr. Jinchi, Mr. Vinod, and Vikram, and our guest, Dr. Tan Zi Hao. So over to you, Dr. Jinchi.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Don't start first, huh?
Okay.
just okay, switching.
You know, are you going to leave it out there?
Constantly loading.
Okay, yeah. Hello, everybody. So now we are live on Facebook. Welcome to audience on Facebook. Here, over to you, Dr. Jinchi.
Thank you, Charles. Hi, guys. Good evening. Okay, I'm Jinchi, and I have my team today here with me. We have Dr. Charles, Vikram, and Vinod. Welcome to Troublemakers Assembly 2021. This event is organized by the Design School at Taylor's University. Troublemakers is now in its third year, and 2021 is our second year conducting our conferences online. Troublemakers Assembly is a gathering to honor and learn from the inspirational work done by an array of engaging personalities who have, in their own unique ways, made a mark in society through creative problem solving. This year, we have prepared for you another list of exciting troublemaking e-conferences. This series aims at creating audience immersion through an active and meaningful content with the end objective of inspiring the audience to become their very own change makers. To all Taylor staff, make sure you have registered for this session in HR at Taylor's. Attendance will also be taken here. Watch out for the link that we will send later to record your attendance. For other university staff and students whose institutions require proof of attendance, you may write to us. Dr. Tan Zi Hao, you don't have to do that, yeah? There is a survey we have prepared for you so we can get your suggestions for future improvement. The survey link will be provided in the feed after the talk. Don't forget to like and share our Facebook page, our live feed, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, let me formally introduce our speaker for this month, Dr. Tan Zi Hao. Exploring the uneasy intersection of cultural politics and national history, Tan Zi Hao is an artist, writer, and researcher who produces forms of knowledge that complicate dichotomies of self and other. The title of Zi Hao's presentation this evening is "Dust is Where We Meet." Before I pass the session over to the speaker, I encourage everyone to post at least one question for Zi Hao in our live feed during or towards the end of his presentation, as we would love to hear from everyone. Thank you. Let us now welcome Dr. Tan Zi Hao.
Thank you, Jinchi. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Troublemakers Assembly, for having me. When I was being approached to give a sharing for Troublemakers Assembly, the theme given is actually convergence. And just a few months ago, I was having this exhibition at Mutual Aid Project, which is an art space in Wisma Central. The exhibition is called What's Left for Gathering. So it's kind of like a response to the present COVID-19 situation, trying to understand these complexities that we are facing, the isolation that we have, but also thinking about notions of hospitality, right? What do we mean when we're staying? What do we mean by how do we treat the others when coronaphobia in general have led to extreme xenophobic sentiments and also other kinds of fear and anxiety. So I begin to think about dust, partly because when thinking about convergence, right? Dust is this is a metaphor, right? Firstly, it's a metaphor that every life forms kind of is constellated in this form of dust. But at the same time, I'm also thinking about dust in these times of grieving, of mourning, of grief and mourning. Dust is this perfect relevant symbol that kind of speaks to us about ideas about life as well as death, right? Because dust is something that is perceived from the human eye, at least, as gray color. But at the same time, something interesting about gray is that grayness is an indication of the corrosion of time. So dust is this compilation of different stuff that has been touched by time. So to that extent, dust is symbolic, a metaphor of life as well as death, of the passing of time. And I think it's quite relevant, given this situation that we're in, to talk about dust, because we are staying at home, and there are plenty of dust for us to kind of clear up. But when it comes to dust, right, the philosophy of dust has been much talked about. What I'm going to talk about today in this session is not exactly about dust, but about a gatherer of dust, about someone or something that collects dust. And that thing is actually a tiny little creature that I believe most of us who lived in Southeast Asia or tropical countries will be familiar with, right? And that thing is called the household case bearer. So let me share my screen. Can you see it? Good. All right. So this is how this is called the household case bearer, and this is how it looks like. So generally, this is the larva coming out from its case. Otherwise, perhaps one could call it a cocoon, but that is actually a wrong term to call it as such, because it's not actually a cocoon, it's a case. And scientific name for this household case bearer is called Phariocca, right? It's called Phariocca because it actually comes from the Greek term pharo and oikos, which means the carrier of house. So household case bearer is this creature that when it travels from a corner to another, it bears its house everywhere it goes, right? That's why it's called the household case bearer. So this creature will eventually grow into a moth, right? It will undergo pupation, and then it will develop into moth, into adulthood. So the lifespan is around 3 months, maybe just 70 over days. After which it will, so most of the time it will be spending majority of its time within this case. That's why it's called household case bearer, right? And then when it reaches the adulthood, when it becomes a moth, it will only last for a few weeks. So this is an image of the adult moth. On the left is the moth, and on the right is basically this empty larval case. This is of another species, Phariocca precox. Now, what I want to point out here is that when I was trying to look for images or for doing research about this creature, I began to notice that a lot of scientists or entomologists, who are scientists who study insects, they understand household case bearers from the perspective of seeing it as a pest instead of as a moth, right? And these two books, comparing these two books, are quite give us a kind of a good idea about what I mean by that, right? Phariocca as a species of moth can be found in the Handbook of Pest Control, but cannot be found in Barlow's pioneering study of moth in Southeast Asia. So in this sense, Phariocca, this species, household case bearer, is not considered, or perhaps not included in this compilation, in this encyclopedic volume that deals with moth, but it is definitely there when it comes to studies about pest management. And this is an important perspective to kind of unpack, because what we're basically seeing here is that our idea of moth, if you look at this book, is something that is quite closely linked to our ideas of nature. So moth or butterflies in general is seen as something that belongs to outdoors, whereas arthropods, insects that belong indoor, is seldom studied, at least back in a few years ago. But there was, of course, recently there's a reverse of trend where scientists, entomologists begin to study arthropods in the indoors and begin to look at it beyond the purpose of trying to control its population, right? Because there's pest management science where scientists try to contain its population by controlling, limiting its growth. So the study of household case bearers, the information, knowledge that I get mostly from reading these scientific papers, is all about how to control their population, but not so much about their actual behavior. Right? So there is a very human-centric view of household casebearers that we have at the moment. Now I began to notice, feel more curious about household casebearers is when I returned from my postgraduate studies from Singapore, as well as from my field work in Indonesia. What I noticed at home is that there is an explosion of household casebearers at home once I returned from fieldwork. And I begin to notice that my speculation is that perhaps part of them being so increased, their population has increased, is because due to my aging parents, that they have not been able to clean up the house in a much more thorough manner, and that by leaving all this dust in these small little corners that they could not reach due to old age, it has actually increased the nutrition of these little insects that we have at home, right? And therefore their population increased the moment we stop caring about clearing the dust at home, right? Now, what my first reaction to casebearers is that they are all gray, right? But the moment I begin to look closer, pay closer attention to it through macro photography, you'll notice that it's actually quite a colorful assemblage of things, of stuff, right? And the case of a household casebearer actually gives you, if you instigate it closely, it actually provides a keyhole through which you can understand your domestic environment, because it is basically an assemblage of whatever debris and detritus that you can find at home. And these sand and rocks and small little rocks, tiny little things, could include arthropod skin, insect poops, which is called frass, and other things, even microplastics, or even shreds of glass or fabric. And on the right is actually the exoskeleton that they live. They will when they depart from the case, that is what they live kind of stuck in the case, right? When you notice that there is a yellowish exoskeleton hanging from the hanging in the case, it means that the moth has left the case and that case is empty. Now, what is interesting in these casebearers, in these cases, is that you will notice that there is a circular motif on these cases, right? They are in different colors. And the reason that they have this kind of design is because of the way they grow, right? There's this centrifugal patterns. So when the cocoon, when the larval inside expands, they will have to expand their cases as well. And what they do is they will tear their cases and they'll start to collect these different materials from the surrounding again. So when these casebearers move from a location to another location, from one corner to another, the stuff that they're collecting are basically of a different provenance. And therefore, this explains why there's this circular patterns that is rendered in different colors. So obviously, when I notice that there is a green ring on this case, I know that it has, this creature has crawled to a place where my wall is painted green in this color, right? So it gives you an idea of its coordinates, actually. And what I find curious is also in some of these casebearers that I've collected at home, some actually has a hole in it, right? And I wonder why. Who actually created these holes? Because it cannot be from the larva inside, because the larva, they will have two apertures. One is here and the other one is here. And the larva can actually protrude from this or this hole. So there are two apertures in which they can go. There's no front and back, right? If you close this, the one aperture, they will come out from the other. But there's a hole in this casebearer that is located right in the middle. And I wonder what is it about? And I gradually noticed that it is due to a parasitoid, right? And this parasitoid is actually wasps. Now, what some wasps is doing to these creatures is that they will inject their eggs into these larvae. And this, again, is something that is quite an exciting metaphor to me personally, because what appears to be a potentiality of life can, in turn, be consumed by others. So what these parasitoid wasps do is that they will inject eggs within the body of the larva, and the eggs will grow and will consume the organs from within the insect, right? So what they do is they'll consume, they'll grow, and eventually the larva will die within their case. And this is how it looks like if you kind of cut it half, right? The spongy material in the middle is actually the cocoon of the parasitoid wasps. This is how it looks like. Now, the hole that is caused by these wasps will in turn provides something useful for other life forms to come. And if you can pay attention to these videos, you might be able to notice that there are other life forms kind of crawling, right? So basically, the household case bearer, the larva is no longer inside because it has been consumed by the parasite. These strands, black color strands, are actually hair, right? So the larva will usually collect the hair that we have, drop on the floor. They'll collect this hair, they'll chop into small little pieces, and this is basically their food. But if you pay closer attention to these seemingly empty case, what you see is actually a book lice over here, right? The book lice that's moving, right? So what appears to be an empty case and the larva is dead because of this parasite has become a potential site for other life forms to come, right? And in this case, it's the book lice. And this, I feel, this ambivalence of life and death is something that I want to kind of focus on when I'm talking about dust, because dust is really where we meet. Dust is the site where we meet in future, right? As we, in the passing of time, we will all eventually encounter death. But this is also, even in this statement alone, the fact that we encounter death is indicative that we believe that there is a moment of death. But the point is that I'm trying to make here is that life and death, the distinction between life and death is actually more blurry. It's actually more blurred. It's blurry. It's not so clear cut, right? For example, if you look at this face mite, right? They are constantly, to some extent, consuming little particles, skin cells on our face right at this moment, right? And there are thousands, perhaps hundreds, thousands of them on our face at this moment, hiding in our pores that we are unaware of. So even as we're living, we are in a state of, to some extent, we could call it a kind of decomposition, right? So where do we actually draw the lines of life and death, right? What do we mean by living? What is the definition of life? And if you look at these, and I think dust is kind of this site in which living and dying is kind of combines and conflates, because dust is multiform, but at the same time, dust is formless, right? And these are some of the pictures using scanning electron microscopy image, in which the British Museum kind of inspect dust particles on their objects, right? And thus, it seems to this human civilization, it seems that humans are always interested in dust so that we can find ways to eliminate them. But as I've shown you earlier, dust is always already around us, right? That's always around us. And we are, in fact, producers of dust, as we are always shedding skins, and as we're always, our hair always falls off, right? And through this shedding of skin and hair, we are actually creating dust ourselves. Right? And again, in these pictures, British museums, again, they are looking at these dust in order to understand how to get rid of these dust, right? Thus, the purpose of the study of dust is always about eliminating them so that there will not be a space that is somehow tainted by dust. But what I would like to kind of highlight is that even in the word dusting itself is ambivalent, right? The meaning of dusting, there are two senses to the word dusting, right? First, dusting means the layering of dust, right? Dust as a verb, the layering of dust. But at the same time, the more commonsensical definition of dust is clearing of dust, right? So even within the definition of the word dusting, we can find two senses that are two meanings of the word that is highly contradictory, right? Dusting means clearing as well as the layering, the overlaying of dust. So in that sense, I think I guess I'm pointing at the ambiguity of dusting. In fact, we can even question what is dust? What is dusting when we are actually trying to dust something, right? Can we actually clear dust? Isn't dusting a rearranging or reorder of dust, right? we could not clear dust because as we are clearing dust, we're actually creating other dust through our frictions, right? So we are basically rearranging dust and just putting dust away for a moment. It doesn't mean that we can create this space that we consider to be clean and pure. Now, another exploration for household case bearers is that instead of just looking through these case bearers through a macro lens or through light microscopy, I began to be more interested in how perceptions of signs could be challenged through certain microscopic technologies. And a way that I have been exploring is actually through scanning electron microscope. And these are just some of the instruments that we use to have a look at these case bearers. Now, because case bearers are considered quite a large object, most of the time we do not actually need scanning electron microscopy to see it, right? We could use light microscopy, which is actually much more effective because you can see the color of these cases. But scanning electron microscopy, I have chosen these instrument as a way to explore other kinds of perception through the scientific technology. And these are just some images about preparation of specimens. So first, before you actually put in into this SAM technology, you actually have to dry it, and then you have to coat it. You have to undergo this sputter coating process in which, through which the cases will be coated in gold, a thin layer of gold, so that the electrons could reflect, and then the image could be rendered. So these are some of the examples of the case bearer viewed through the scanning electron microscope. I say some because this is not just one image, right? It's a digitally stitched image using 87 snapshots at 100 magnification. Now, from here, just by using a different technology, we begin to notice something else, right? And that is the topography, the structures of the cases. And you can see that, and as I mentioned earlier, that as the case bearer expands and grow, the bits, the particles that they collect, the size of it will increase as well. So you can see that the size that are bigger, the particles that are bigger is actually located on the outside. And when they just begin, it's actually quite small at the center. This is another example. Now, we tend to have this assumption that with such scientific accuracy that is afforded through scanning electron microscope, we believe that what we are seeing is actually accurate. But this is often not the case, right? If you look at this particular image that I've stitched together, there are some spots that are overexposed, right? If you look at these, if you look at some strange spots over here, there are some strange difference of lighting and darkness, right? And this partly have to do with charging, electron charging that is inconsistent, and perhaps also due to the nature of biological sample that created all these misrepresentation of the surface. So what we have perceived as scientific high resolution, scientific accuracy is in fact filtered through something that could give us not accuracy, but a kind of distortion, right? And this is something important when we are viewing something through a scientific lens, right? And when I'm working on this project as well, apart from talking about the philosophy of dust, I also want to deal with the very way of looking at dust, the very way humans understand nature through scientific filters, is that the science is always subject to historical changes and through technological advancement. And the change of technologies, the paradigm shift that happened in scientific revolution will eventually shift the way we understand and perceive nature, right? And the idea that what is shown through this scanning electron microscopic image is an example of that. It's a testament of that what we perceive as high resolution is not necessarily something that is accurate. These are also from the same electron microscopy, but this is the interior of it. So you can see that they use silk to combine all these different particles. this is a work in progress, just so you to make clear that these images are actually composed of multiple images at the same magnification. And if you pay closer attention, right, and this is something that you might not be able to see through a usual digital microscope, right? If you pay closer attention to some of these bits on the case bearer, you can actually find arthropods remain, right? In this case, it is the legs of an insect. And there are some sand, perhaps, particles and fiber. And here is an example of, again, an arthropod skin, right? That is very small, probably a thick, right? And this, I think, is something that I want to kind of move towards when it comes to thinking about the situation that we're in and the situation of the Anthropocene that we are facing today, right? That dust is truthfully where we meet, right? Is this assemblage of life and death, right? The moment we think of dust as something that we no longer need it, but in fact, dust give potentials to other life forms. So in this case, case bearers, right? By collecting dust and even by consuming what we call dust, right? They are effectively living a life that is anew. And these are some of the ideas that I've explored in my exhibition by way of conclusion in What's Left for Gathering, right? In the exhibition that I kind of mentioned earlier. And through these exhibitions, some of the works that I have presented, some of these scanning electron microscopic image are actually part of this exhibition, where I show snippets of parts of these case bearers. The other one on the bottom left is actually an insect display box. It's basically just pinning them onto this foam board, kind of like making a museum, like an insect museum that you typically see. But and here again, I'm trying to challenge the language of science, right? What is perceived as scientific, but in this case, in this exhibition, it is used as a language in art, right? To challenge certain things that we've assumed as we see or as we understand nature through a scientific lens. So I guess that's the end of the sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I was, for a while there, we were all thinking, what goes on in your mind that allows you to see such things, observe such things, but also to come up with such things, right? I mean, that's not a question, it's just a general observation. We're just wondering in our heads, I mean, what does it take to actually think like that? It's really interesting. I think it's, as one of our moderators actually noted, it seems to be a blending of science and art. And I think anybody who came in midway would have thought that this is some kind of scientific presentation on some by a zoologist or someone who, or somebody who specializes in insects or something, and then all of a sudden would have got a shock towards the end that it's actually a conceptual art piece, and that is really what you would say a twist in the plot. Yeah, so that's really cool. With that, let me just segue into the first question we have. There's an interesting question by Sherry Blankenship, and her question is, are these case bearers ever harmful or dangerous, or are they instead necessary?
Well, that is an interesting question, because what do we mean by are these species necessary, right? And that's also part of the problem of the way scientists or science have been pushed by existing funding institutions to kind of trying to look for things that are of good value to humans, right? But sometimes these things they just exist, and they are, right? And science is basically a tool to understand these things as they are, instead of having our own views about what good use of they do have for us. I think a more important question is how could we understand nature
Oop, I think we lost Zihao there. Yeah. Okay, we'll just wait for him to come back while we. While he's waiting to come back. He must be having a really curious mind to dig up such things and then explore it, learn it, understand it, and then figure out a way he can get excited. I mean, he must to eventually manifest something from it, right? He must have a really curious mind, even possibly a childlike mind, right? I mean,
the part where he asks, how come there is the hole in the middle of the case bearer?
Yeah. So maybe what do you call it? Maybe he's young, and because he's young, he's probably closer to his childlike self than maybe we are. But he looks young. I mean, how old do you think he is? Must be about what, mid-30s or it cannot be. Yeah, is it mid?
The info is in his website, guys.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Yes.
Yes, I can share. Yes, it's there, but.
I feel like he's a bit of a polymath as well. Like because he does so many things. He's kind of like, in performance art, and then he's doing a bit of, I don't know, household case bearers, and he's going into all this art.
Hello,
stuff.
Zihao.
Welcome back.
So we were just discussing about your mind. How you must be having a really curious mind to really, to take something so insignificant and make it significant. One has to have some level of curiosity to really explore such an inane or mundane object, a life, right? You know what I mean? Something that I would only recognize in annoyance as opposed to in an admiring way, which I find really interesting. That being said, let me actually put to you a question by Dr. Jinji. So she asks, you have done many conceptual pieces in your career so far as a conceptual artist. So why have you chosen this topic to share with your audience today?
Well, this has to do with, again, response towards the current situation that we have, right? As I've mentioned earlier, and thus is something that we tend to overlook, right? And the moment I feel that when we pay close attention to something that we have already known, but we've just simply overlooked, I think there is a potential for change, for social political change, right? When there is a shift of mindset. So I think it's important to look at something that everyone is familiar, something that belongs to the everyday, part of the everyday fabric of life. But to ask important questions by literally magnifying these life forms, or magnifying dust, essentially, right? By looking at these gatherers or these consumers, producers of dust that are actually just beside us, or even feeding on the proof of our mortality, right? Feeding on our skins, feeding on our hair, but we are entirely unaware of it, right? In fact, we are always trying to get rid of these so-called household pests, or we're trying to get rid of dust in general, right? We're always trying to create these boundaries between what is clean and what is not clean. Even for the British Museum examples that I've shown, they are also looking at dust so that they could get rid of it, so that the artifacts in the museum could be protected. So our understanding of preservation, our understanding of vitality and life is always predicated on the elimination of something else, without being fully aware that this act of eliminating is a failure to acknowledge that life forms are multiple, and coexistence, cohabitation is always present, even if we're trying to eliminate them.
The next time someone tells me to clean my room or sweep the floor, I'm going to just use what you just said. Okay. I was a bit taken aback when you when you mentioned something to do with politics and the dust. How do you make that connection? Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I guess the act of looking at something that is familiar and to estrange it, right? Because the moment you zoom in on something, you are exchanging it, and I feel that that is itself a form of politics, right? That's cultural politics, in which by changing the way we look at things, that would change the way we respond to this world, right? That would change the way we do politics, we understand politics, right? It will change the way we interact with other kinds of, with other human beings, as well as the way we engage with society and with the non-human. So I think in that sense, by shifting focus to something else that is familiar but not necessarily known, I think it will make quite a subtle change in the way we perceived politics and society.
Okay, interesting answer there. I mean, I think the next few questions I have for you is pertaining to the type of discipline of art that you practice, which has got to do with conceptual art. And I was wondering, how is that conceptual art different from, let's say, your usual fine arts, painting, sculpture, etc.? How is it different? I think it's a form of art that's been there. It's been around for a while, but it's not really well understood. So I think if you could enlighten us on that, since you practice it a lot, that would be great.
Well, it's very difficult to speak of a distinction between different art forms today, because to some extent, even contemporary paintings are a form of conceptual art these days, right? So painters that we have today, most of the time, while the form might not seem to be necessarily something that we would associate with conceptualism, conceptualism has a huge amount of influence on contemporary paintings or even drawings today, right? So it's quite difficult to kind of separate what constitutes conceptual art today. I think in the context, in this present context of art, it is more, we're all more comfortable just by calling everything as contemporary art.
Okay, so that's like a broad brush that would just kind of fit all these things in. Do you agree or disagree that concept art takes less craft and more creative thinking? It predicates its. I wonder whether it predicates its whatever it posits on the rationality of it, or rather, the thinking, hence concept, right? Do you think it takes less craft and more? I mean, and that's more, thinking, as opposed to, I mean, what you're actually projecting out there is more of the thinking as opposed to the the visual experience.
At a very general level, yes. But at the same time, this it goes back to the how do we understand what constitutes craft, right? And why do we have this distinction between art and craft, right? While I believe a majority of us have some kind of distinction between art and craft, but the moment we begin to kind of, if we try to kind of separate them in to create definitions for these two terms, it will be quite a difficult feat to do that. Most of the time, when it comes to crafting, one could even say that conceptual artists would also require some forms of craft, right? But that's craft in thinking, in coming up with the idea. That is also an act of crafting. And how does conceptualism create a kind of the idea? How do you represent an idea? How do you perform that idea? That itself, right? There is a kind of visual communication that's involved in this, and these communication has to be, to some extent, crafted.
Right.
And when in this process of crafting, artists works with existing language games. So painters would have a very different language games to work with, whereas in conceptualism, there are other presuppositions that you have to work with, right? So it is through all these different engaging with these different language games that you have to kind of think about how do you craft an idea, how do you present an idea.
Yeah.
So I think that in that sense, it is hard to actually separate craft, conceptualism, and fine art in general.
Yeah, there seems to be a craft involved in the collation of all those thought processes and packaging it in a certain way. So one of our Dr. Jinchi actually noticed that a few of your works, namely xenophilic handshakers, xenophoric shell pickers, that was in 2014, Skeleton of Makara, The Myth of the Myth, in 2016, has a theme revolving around nature. And so do you find yourself often inspired by natural elements?
It is not something that I'm fully conscious of. So recently, yes. But it's not a direction that I kind of have pondered on and kind of wanted to take. I think it's just the nature of the way part of my trajectory of life, right? Because as I've told you, it is my returning from my postgraduate studies that have made me think about pests at home in domestic spaces. So so I could not say that it's something that I intended to be so, to think about nature, not necessarily that, but it seems perhaps due to our existing condition, right? Environmental ecological crisis that have also might have some influence partly because of the things that I've been reading, that will definitely have some impact on the way I think about my surrounding.
So there's a question from the floor, and I think it fits in well with the present line of questioning. And so it's from Hu Fan Chon. And the question is, when you were engaging this project, were you thinking as a visual artist, scientific researcher, or cultural studies practitioner?
I guess that is an interesting question because I don't think that that can be entirely divided. Because I mean, they're all part of me, right? I'm a product of whatever that I've come across. So it's just that I've presented it in the form of art, and therefore it is convenient to be called artists. So these are basically just labels, but it's actually just one person doing it, right? We have to be aware it's just one person doing it.
One very curious person doing it.
I guess when there are some distinction nonetheless, if we are talking about artists from an artist's point of view and a scientist's point of view, because say a scientist might not use scanning electron microscopy to actually look at Casebearers, because that is actually from a perspective of scientific inquiry, it's a fruitless attempt trying to look at the topography of the Casebearer when you can just see it through a light microscope. So in that sense, it's fruitless, right? And when I'm working on the scanning electron microscope, there are also interesting exchange between myself and the lab assistant, right? Because the lab assistant she was thinking about why do I need these images? What are they for? And we have very different understanding of what constitutes a good image, right? So for a scientist, then the image has to be informative. It has to have some information about the structure of the surface. But for me, when I was picking these images, I've considered the composition, the aesthetics of it, that is quite different from the way they see this, the use, the purpose. So the purpose of the image is different. Yeah. And I think when we have that conversation, that distinction between scientists and artists is quite clear.
It's actually very interesting. I had a similar experience so one of the skill sets that I have is I used to be I don't do it as much now, but essentially I used to be a professional photographer, and one of the things that I used to do was, shoot portraits for magazines and so on and so forth. But so often back in the day, I'm talking about 2000, 2004, 2005, I was still shooting on slide. I think I was probably one of the last people to shoot on slide film. So I mean, I was still shooting on slide until the lab closed down, right? Anyways, so there was this one instance where I was shooting on black and white film, and I was going through the normal process of analog film production, and I was printing a black and white artwork, and the lab technician was looking at it in a particular perspective. He was looking at, okay, this is a Chinese person, so therefore the skin tone has to be of this, of this color. I mean, in black and white. And I'm looking at it. I mean, I don't want that. I want it to be darker. But this guy's Chinese. He's looking at me and he's saying. So I was like stuck. So I mean, I kind of understand the conundrum that you were referring to over there. It does bring up, these. It's interesting, right? To note their way of associating what is appropriate and what's not. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to another question. So am I? Sorry, yes, Jinchi. You.
Sorry, I just got one question, but Vinod, you ask first. I'll gonna organize the question and come back to you.
Okay.
I'll send
All
it
right.
to you.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
So am I correct in my understanding? So this is a little bit about, I think, a little centered on you as a person. And so am I correct in my understanding that you received a scholarship to do your diploma, and then you received your scholarship to do your degree as well? And then you received another scholarship to do your master's, and then another scholarship to do your PhD.
Yes.
So you are, you are 100%. You are a scholar in that sense, right? I mean, you seem to have got a scholarship right throughout. So the question is, in your pre-con interview, I think you mentioned that you were lucky, but I don't think it's about luck. Can you explain to me? How did you manage this? I mean, how is this possible?
Well, I think it's definitely not. Of course, it's not just only about luck, but luck has a lot to do with it as well, right? Timing and everything. I don't know how I'm able to do it. In fact,
I gotta tell you, you're the only person I know who's received a scholarship 4 times. I mean, I don't know, maybe I don't know enough people, I don't know, but you're the first person. So I'm curious to understand, what does it take to be that kind of a person, to be, constantly accepted for, I mean, and looked at as scholarship material, you know what I mean? It seems to me like it's a laborious task to apply for a scholarship, go through all the hoops that is required, the interviews, the writings, whatever it is that you have to produce to get a scholarship. And to do this in your diploma, in your degree, in your master's, in your PhD, it's a feat. I mean, in my mind, I don't know what it is in actuality, obviously.
Well, I have a very different understanding of these process because I would think that because I have to rely on scholarship, I will have to then my selection of schools are quite limited. So my scholarship, for example, for my diploma is actually I got it from an art competition, right? And then from a media company, and after that so it's from a private sponsor, and after that it's from public institutions. So it's because of these, because I have to rely on scholarship, or else I would not have the chance to kind of pursue my education. I could not actually plan which school do I actually have to go to. So when I receive information that I've been accepted for a scholarship, I'll just go straight ahead and without thinking much, without actually trying other schools. So in that sense, it's just the first time if I try it, and if it's successful, then I just go straight ahead. So it's through this quite random trajectory of getting scholarship in different schools and studying different disciplines that have led me to this place of perhaps thinking between different fields of studies. So from design, graphic design, to cultural studies, then to international relations, and then to history, to Southeast Asian studies. So by looking, and I was actually, even before I started my diploma, I've always wanted to do fine art. It's just that the schools that I attend, the first tertiary education that I attended did not offer fine art back then. So I ended up doing advertising and graphic design. And then I thought it's quite interesting to study something else to do fine art, right? So I continued that line of thought, and I consciously refused to study fine art. Obviously, that is not possible because then I'm also reading art history, so it's not entirely possible to kind of not study fine art. That's just ideal thinking. But I refused to have formal education about fine art when I continued my further study. So I wanted to study different things. So that is also quite conscious. I wanted to learn new knowledge at every single level. So from diploma to degree to master's to PhD, I wanted to try different things, which is actually a decision that might appear to be quite maybe intriguing in the field of art and design. But I feel that having studied, gone through this process of writing a doctorate thesis, I begin to notice that actually hurts more than it benefits if you intend to have an academic career. Because in the academic field, you're required to study the same thing from undergraduate to postgraduate. So the moment you begin to skip from a field to another, you are losing focus, right? And you're trying to do too many things according to the demand of the academia. So in that sense, if you want to have an academic career, to be a researcher, to teach in universities, this background of kind of being here and there is not necessarily a positive thing.
I find that very difficult. I get it. I understand what you mean, because you're looking for somebody who's very pointed, where he or she has, mastered knowledge in a very organized, but also in a very linear manner, and accumulated this knowledge that's to its potency, its levels of potency. But I think that makes that person also, in a sense, sometimes boring for me. I don't know. Is that? I mean, obviously, in your case of choosing these, you just chose it on the basis of interest, but also what is most accessible at that point in time, right?
What is available, I guess. What is available?
What's available? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So we have a question. Did you want to put this towards?
Oh, sure. You mean the next question that's coming up?
Yeah.
That's been asked. Yes, sure. We have a question by Susie Sulaiman. Yeah. Your works seem to play between politics of myth. Would you agree scale or size is also susceptible to politics? Thanks.
Yes. Scale and size is definitely susceptible to politics. When I'm looking at these Casebearers in particular, the microscopic view of these creatures, right, it's also a symbolic gesture, right, to talk about something that is generally broad, right? The moment you begin to narrow down onto something that is microscopic, right, and to kind of to deliberate over macroscopic issues, philosophy of life and death, I think that itself is trying to reverse the very scale of politics. And politics is often seen as something that, I mean, in a popular understanding of politics, is something that is partisan, at the same time, from top to bottom, right? But here we have a case of something that we have overlooked, something that is really marginal in our household, but something that is always there, something that is ever present. And the moment we begin to understand these things and why they continue to exist, right, we will begin to understand and we'll begin to kind of perhaps conceive a form of politics that is more tolerant towards other life forms and towards things that we have perceived as other.
Right. Nicely put. So So this is a weird question, but I'm just going to put it out there anyways. And if it doesn't work, blame me. But okay. So when you are at a party, okay, and someone asks you, this typical questions that you get in a party, what do you do, and what do you say?
What do I do?
Meaning, like, someone asks you, oh, okay, and I'm a doctor, okay. And so when somebody asks you, the reason I ask that question is because you're a writer, you're a researcher, you're an educator, you're a concept artist. I mean, that's your hands in many pies, right? So that's why I'm asking you this question. So, when someone asks you, what do you do? What do you say? And how do you say it?
Well, I guess these are just, again, they seem to be multiple because these are just labels, right? But essentially, every single individual experience life in a multiple way, right? Despite the fact that one claims himself to be a designer, for example, that designer is still engaging in works that is beyond the field of design. Whether or not there is a label to describe that other fields of design, that is the limits of language, right? So the fact that I do many things doesn't mean that I can be kind of separated into these different roles, these distinct roles, just that it's just part of the description. And because I feel that whether I'm writing, teaching, and making art, the research that I'm doing, the effects of it can be seen through all these different practices in my writings, in my artworks, as well as sometimes in the way I think about the way I conceptualize certain things. I feel is
so. Would it be fair then to, if I were to simplify, if I have a simple mind and I want to peg you, I want to label you, would it be fair that I say that you're more researcher than anything else?
Yeah, I guess so. Research is definitely a huge part of my daily activities, reading and writing.
Okay. So as an educator then, are you an educator because you're a researcher?
Yes. So there are two kinds of two ways in which we can talk about these. One is whether you teach in a formal education, in a formal institution, educational institution, or you teach or by other means, by writing, right, by publishing articles.
Right.
So I think in both ways. At the moment, I'm teaching at MMU, and so in that sense, I'm a formal lecturer in a formal institution. But at the same time, I feel that the role of educator is not limited to the limits of institution. Beyond that, right? When you are creating works, when you are organizing certain activities that has educational elements of education in it, for example, organizing workshops and other events that engages the public, or even writing itself, it has certain elements of education.
A lot of times people get into education because they're trying to do something. I know why I got into education. I'm wondering, are you trying to achieve something by by being an educator?
Well, I think education is the most direct way of changing, of exerting change. And it is a kind of, like a kind of Gramscian war of position where instead of change, as in political change, where political change could happen overnight, right? The change that is instituted through education is a long process. And that, I feel, is a process that is much more important because it will have it will show in the future, and you cannot actually pinpoint to what extent the effects of your education will actually result in something. It's hard to say, it's hard to pinpoint, right? But I feel that that is the kind of change that educators could make.
So in addition to now I'm looking at your writing, which, I mean, or rather, I just want to understand, is your writing, when you are a writer, not a researcher, is it still scholarly in its thrust, and is it still scholarly, or do you let your hair down?
Well, it depends on the platform. So if it's for a journal article, then it will be very scholarly.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, for example, you have a site, which I think you can plug right now. I think it's tanzihao.net. So when you write for your own site, I mean, what's your approach there? I mean, that must be a natural way of, I mean, it must be quite natural for you. So what is the sound or the tone or tenor of your writing then?
Well, if it's about my artwork, then it's mostly from the perspective of the artist. Okay. But I understand that different artists write quite differently, right? There's no one standard way for art writing.
Yeah.
So I can't really say much about art writing in general. But the way I write, I believe, based on what I've received from what I've heard from other people, is that tends to be more academic.
Okay.
Obviously has a lot to do with the way I was being trained.
Yeah. Okay. And I think this would be, I mean, I think I'm bordering my last question here. So I'm wondering, in your pursuit of your PhD, when you were you shuffling between Malaysia, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, or were you in Singapore entirely during that time?
Yeah, I was between Singapore and KL, and also actually in between three countries, Indonesia, in Cirebon, where I did my field work. So between these three countries.
What was your thesis about?
The study of Islamic art, zoomorphic imaginary. So looking at how animals are being depicted in Islamic art in Cirebon. Because most of the time we have this idea that Islamic art tends towards abstract representation, geometrical representation. But in some of these locations in Indonesia, not only Indonesia, in fact, right, in Southeast Asia in general, despite an explicit Islamic art form, they do depict zoomorphism.
This is animal form in calligraphic, using calligraphic, is it? Calligraphy, is it?
That as well, but not just that. So it's animal in calligraphic form, like zoomorphic calligrams, as well as animals that is being depicted in quite figuratively.
Okay, all right. I guess, Jinchi, we'll have to invite Zihao next year to talk about this, because this is something I need to know about as well. I'm a little curious now.
For sure.
Okay, bonsoir. I think I'm done. Do you guys have any further questions for Dr. Tan Zihao?
Not from me. Vic, you have any questions?
Not for me as well.
Dr. Charles?
Charles is in manhole.
No, but I think it's really amazing that perceptions is just not limited. It's just there's no limit to how we can perceive everything, and it's just a lot that we take for granted. I think what you're doing, how you blend art and science, making such statements, but not just that. I think there's so much philosophical thought that goes into this, has taught us a great deal, and I'm sure our audience have whoever's been watching, I'm sure they've been quite inspired, and no doubt, we will continue this discussion. I mean, you started a discussion here, and I think it's almost like a kind of a virus, and now it's spreading. So we're not going to talk about Casebearers alone. So what about other things? Like we're starting to look at everything else.
Oh my God, the face might.
I think what's been really good is that, like what Dr. Charles has said, it has opened up other things now. I mean, like, it's given us a little bit of pause. And I think for people who are watching today, but also people who will be watching after this, asynchronously, it would be a really interesting, to see, or rather, it will be an interesting change in them as well, in their thought processes, right? So I think in that way, it's reflective of our COVID situation. You've infected us with a certain way of looking at things. And I would like to thank you for that infection. I mean, I'm deeply, I feel a lot of gratitude in that way, towards you, for the sharing that you have, so beautifully done today. So I'd like to say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. And with that, I'm done, and I'll hand it over to Jinchi for the closing comments.
Thank you, Vinod. I also want to thank all who have been here watching from YouTube and also Facebook. And those who will be watching post-event, I think it will be great also if they have questions for us, and upon which we will compile and see how can we send to you if there are any more questions. So you can just answer it, and then we will just post it back to the YouTube or Facebook. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much, Xiao. It's been wonderful. Earlier on, he did ask me, he said, if I went too long, please tell me, okay, stop me. Then I said, I think I might forget because I will be very captivated in the talk, And yeah, I think we all were. And thank you so much, Xiao. And I thank my team very much. Vic, Vinod, Dr. Charles. Well, guys, have a good weekend. Xiao, we'll keep in touch. And looking forward to working with you again. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Zihao. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, audience. Thanks for joining us.